Hi, today we're going to be talking about a subject near and dear to my heart.
Distortion.
Specifically, how to use distortion to improve your production. Distortion is maybe the most misunderstood and underutilized effect out there, at least for mixers and producers who are just starting out. Very few listeners really understand just how much distortion is being used in the music that they hear every day. Now, before I dive into specifics about how to use distortion, I want to talk a little bit about why we would even do this in the first place. We went through all this effort to record nice, high-quality audio, and now we're just going to distort it? So, first of all, we need to get a big myth out of the way. Specifically, the myth of fidelity, or as it's more often called, good sound. If you remember one thing from this video, remember this. There is no such thing as good or bad sound. Sound is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. The end, in this case, is the listener's experience. Sound is just a tool that we use to influence the listener's experience. It can be effective or ineffective in terms of accomplishing our goals, but you can't say a sound is good or bad in an absolute sense. It can only be judged in the context of how we want the sound to affect the listener. So remember, clarity is not our goal, fidelity is not our goal, even beauty is not our goal when we make a recording. These are just dynamic spectrums that we can use to influence our listeners. Saying that recording should always be clear and free of distortion is no more sensible than saying that all songs should have a fast tempo. Basically, any processing that you do in a mix is going to involve a trade-off. Obviously, when you process audio, it should do something that you like. So you need to know what you're trying to accomplish when you process, and you need to pay attention to if you're actually getting what you want. But the other side of the coin here is that processing will almost inevitably create unwanted side effects as well. So the trick to good processing decisions is to find that sweet spot where you're getting as much of the desirable stuff as possible and a minimum of the undesirable stuff. So without too much further ado, let's get into some specifics of how to use distortion. This is a trick I've been using a lot lately. When you have a kick drum that's been recorded with an inside and an outside mic, I like to distort the outside mic while leaving the inside mic clean. Now, the reason that I like distorting kick drums in the first place is that even a pretty well recorded kick drum can often sound a little bit thin to my ears. And distortion, when used with moderation, is a lovely way to add some density and some body to sounds. So we got kick in and the kick out here. So I'll just play them both for you soloed. Just nice sharp attack. But not like a ton of like boominess or body to it, really. It's just really you're getting that sound of a beater against the drum, which makes sense because that's where the mic is. It's in the hole, really close to where the beater is actually hitting the skin of the drum. So now I'll play the kick out for you without any distortion first.
It's like a pillow.
Yeah, it's very pillowy. Here there's not nearly as much transient as with the kick in, but you do get a little more body. It's not like booming like crazy. But then we throw our old pal, the decapitator, on there. It's set to cook pretty good right now. So let's see what that sounds like. Very different. Not too subtle.
Yeah.
That's a cool sound. Like I love the sound of distorted kick drum. But the problem that you'd have with that in a mix is there's just not like a ton of attack or punch on it. I mean, there's still some. Like, it hasn't completely killed it. But like, compare that to the sharpness of...
Oh yeah.
Doesn't quite have that like really aggressive smack sound. So the idea is you have them both in, and you kind of have your body with a kick out, and then you just bring in your transient to taste. And yeah, it's pretty simple.
Yeah,
just
it's a fat kick.
Yeah, a nice way to get a cool sounding kick drum. Another common use of distortion is brightening up guitars. A lot of the time, guitar parts particularly if you actually mic'd an amp. You need a little help in the high end to get them to the brightness level that listeners expect in modern music. Now, of course, you can just do this with EQ, and often I do, but the cool thing about distortion is that we can get a little bit of extra sustain and attitude out of our guitars while we're brightening them up. So we got our nice little distorted guitar here, and it's actually already relatively bright. Like, you don't necessarily need to add a whole lot of top-end EQ to this thing. Here, I'll play it for a sec. Obviously, there's already quite a lot of distortion that the guitar player just added at the amp and pedal level. But, you know, that should never stop you. and, you know, in some ways I think of it as like an opportunity because, you know, they already piled on so much. What's a little more kind of hurt? It's a little hard really to say if you would actually want to add brightness to it when it's out of context like this. But let's pull up the decapitator and just see if we can give it a little bit of brightness. Because there is so much distortion, it's not going to take a whole lot of drive here to really like push this into like hissy, fizzy kind of territory. Like, I'll give you an example if I just crank this up like crazy. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
But like, you notice the thing at the top end of the spectrum, it almost sounds like a frying pan a little bit going. If you get your frying pan super hot and put some food in, and you just hear like the sizzle.
Yeah.
That kind of sound. Which isn't necessarily always a bad thing. It's totally subjective. It just depends on what you're going for. In this case, you know, let's say that I don't want to go to that really extreme territory where you're getting that like high-end breakup. Basically, the way you're going to set the drive setting is just get it as bright as you can before you start to hear that sort of, the sizzle, the frying pan noise. It's like right about there, and again, it's very subjective, as I've said hundreds of times already.
Do you find that the feeling of hearing silence and then hearing the tone is different than hearing the tone dark and then fading it up?
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. That's a very useful thing to do whenever you're like adding brightness or adding low end or really like doing any significant EQ-y kind of move. Is because your ear kind of adapts to it as you're doing it. Like our ears were adapting to that increase in highs as we were pushing this drive knob up. So now if I play it, it'll probably sound a little bit brighter to us than it did before. Yeah, maybe. The other thing to watch out for is the flattening of dynamics that comes with distortion. Distortion inherently reduces dynamics, so whenever we have a part that relies on volume dynamics for a lot of its expression, we have to be really careful that we don't neuter it by reducing its dynamic range too much. For our last example, I want to look at how we can use distortion to modify the emotional content of a performance. We can use the decapitator to really kind of like change just the overall feel of the performance in a significant way. I'll just start by playing kind of a little bit of the chorus of this song with the vocals.
Cool.
I wish I could move into the landscape, but black sheep can't hide in snow. I tried so hard to make a bend, oh, but black sheep can't hide in snow.
You're not really going to be able to add an emotion that's not already there with distortion. But you can kind of bring out what's already there and bring it to the forefront. So, you know, there's already like some aggression, some attitude in that take clearly. But we want to like really push it to the front and make it larger than life.
I wish I could move into the landscape, but black sheep can't hide in snow. I tried so hard to make a bend, oh, but black sheep can't hide in snow.
So yeah, like already there, and this is the part where words get a little tricky to describe what you're hearing, but there's just more attitude to it. Like there's just more vibe.
It seems like when she digs in, now it's really digging in.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think that's kind of how it's working. You kind of perceive the aggressiveness because you hear like, oh, there's there's distortion when she's getting loud, so she's just going so crazy. She's frying the preamp, she's frying the equipment. It's a lie, an illusion.
I wonder if before there was recorded music, if you had played a recording, if people intuitively would hear clipping as an aggression, a pushing, a leaning in, or if we've learned that.
Yeah, I don't know. That's actually a really good thought. Because they might not. It might be something that we've kind of been conditioned to from hearing. You know, people sing, they get really passionate, they go a little too loud, clip the preamp. But
there is distortion in your acoustic vocals.
That's true. Yeah.
So the harder you scream, the more it gets actually kind of like that.
Yeah, I suppose you do get distortion in nature, like whether it's from the voice or like a stringed instrument or whatever. Like you get kind of some weird, you know, you can hear on an acoustic guitar if you like literally just strum as hard as you can. You get some kind of funky anomalies with it. Obviously, there's not a lot of complexity to what I'm doing here. I'm just literally turning one knob. The complexity is in what you're paying attention to. And to go back to that concept of trade-offs, the trade-off that I'm most concerned with here is the trade-off between this aggressiveness, this attitude, but as I turn this up, I'm losing kind of the nuances of what she's doing. Like there's a lot of detail that as you add more distortion, you start to lose. And just like notice like the little nuances of how she does the different words and kind of compare with distortion and without.
I wish I came out into the landscape, but black sheep can't hide in snow. I wish I came out into the landscape, but black sheep can't hide in snow. I tried so.
It's kind of like a subtle point, but just kind of like the little physical details of what she's doing get a little obscured the more distortion you add. And it's, you know, true with any instrument, but especially you hear it on vocals where there's so much nuance just based on what they're doing with their mouth and just in their throat and their face and all that. You know, you express yourself through the decisions that you make. So I can't give you any real guidance on where you want that drive knob to be. You just have to listen and pay attention.
Know what you're looking for, know what it's doing.
And I should like add an important caveat. I don't think when you're actually doing a mix, you should be thinking these thoughts. And, you know, thinking about it now will influence your actions later. Like I've spent plenty of time trying to like live in that sort of left brain verbal world while mixing, and I've found nothing but disaster in it. So like don't think too much.
There's big parallels between that and improvisation using music theory, because practicing theory, practicing all your chords and your skills and figuring out like how to play diatonically is necessary, but then when it's time to perform, you don't want to necessarily be thinking in those confines. You want to just play and it just comes out. Yeah. And here is that how you've experienced it?
No, exactly. It's the same thing, but performance for a mixer is when you're doing the mix, and the performance you want your mind's just be clear and you just want to go and trust your instincts and try to create something as musical and cool as you can.